Hello, NBs, boys and girls. All right, so today we're diving deeper into Lesson 2 Logical Reasoning Basics. We're starting on page 40 of the LSAT Trainer by Mike Kim. And yeah, I guess we'll get right into it. Don't really feel like sharing anything new or specific today. Not much to discuss anyway, other than had a meeting earlier with a comrade, so um, but that was all party business, so not for public consumption. Anyway, we'll get right to this. Starting on page 40, the roadmap to mastery. Do you have it in you to gain logical reasoning mastery? I really hope so. I firmly believe, based on what I know about this exam and based on what I've experienced with students, that almost anyone who has a fairly strong command of the English language and a good amount of common sense or good sense can get to a high level of mastery with logical reasoning questions. The design of these questions has stayed extremely consistent over time, and they are all simple enough to be learnable. They make clear sense, and with practice, you can get good at solving them. And it's not just, like a party gimmick or whatever that we're working on, right? According to this book and according to, like what we want to learn, we're learning skills and habits. So those are the two areas that we want to build competency in, right? Or that, uh, well, yeah, we can build competency in, I guess, but what we're doing is through skill and habits, we're building competency. So that's the impetus behind this. Natural aptitude does play a part on how long the learning process takes. For some of you, the design of the exam will just naturally better align with how you think, and so it'll be easier to develop and habitualize skills. For others, the strategy and habits we discuss will butt against other instincts you have, instincts that may serve you well in other parts of your life, and the path to improvement will be steeper and less direct. However, in my experience, natural aptitude does not have as significant an impact on the overall outcome of the study process as you might think. Of far more importance are drive and work ethic. If you want it badly enough and if you know how to work, you can get there. We can think of our path to logical reasoning mastery in terms of three major stages. Stage one, we are going to start our logical reasoning preparation by focusing on the reasoning and reading issues and strategies that are most critical to most questions. All right, so let's go back to our document here. So we're focusing on uh, reasoning and reading issues and strategies most important. Are most critical to solving most questions. As we just discussed, the primary way in which the logical reasoning section tests your reasoning ability is by presenting arguments for which the support given does not justify the conclusion reached. The most significant job that your elephant must do again and again is to figure out exactly why the support given does not justify the conclusion reached. Okay, so the most significant job our subconscious elephant must do is to figure out why the support given does not justify the conclusion reached. Is to figure out exactly why the support given does not justify the conclusion reached. If your elephant is great at doing this, you will have the key skill necessary for logical reasoning success. Getting good at seeing flaws will be the primary goal of our first stage. The first stage is to get good at seeing flaws in arguments. 4. We will introduce and get experience with all of the different types of flaws that can appear in arguments, and we will work on systems of thought that will help us catch these flaws more consistently and accurately. And what you will find along the way is that when you are focused on finding the flaw in the argument, you end up naturally reading the stimulus the way you are supposed to, in a way that best matches the design of the questions. Therefore, as we learn more about reasoning flaws and become better at recognizing them, we will also be working on habitualizing the reading strategies that best align with the design of this exam. Stage 2. The goal of this stage is to round out and solidify our understanding of all important issues, to develop a very clear understanding of the specific tasks that different questions present, and to start to habitualize question-specific approaches. Okay, so here is a graphic on page 41 that stages to mastery. One, and it's laid out like a bullseye or concentric circles. 1, get good at reading and critiquing LSAT arguments. 2, get good at answering different types of questions. 3, habitualize the effective processes or processes. So reading and critiquing LSAT arguments. Yeah, okay. We kind of stated that already. So the second stage is to get good at answering different types of questions. Because the LSAT is largely a test of reading ability, it's understandable that the test writers are not casual with the language that they use. The entire exam is worded in a very specific and careful way. Nowhere is their attention to wording detail more evident than in the construction of their question stems. Each type of question presents a unique type of challenge, and the question stem lays out that challenge very specifically. No words are wasted, and every bit of information in that stem is critical to answering the question as efficiently and effectively as possible. Okay, um, so question stems are critical to finding the correct answer. Well, hold on. So, question stems actually present critical information to answering the question as efficiently and effectively as possible. What complicates the challenge is that these various questions require skills and strategies that in some ways overlap and in other ways don't. The way you solve a strengthening question is similar to how you solve a required assumption question. And to put arbitrary numbers on it, 80% of the work you do for the two types of questions will be pretty much the same, and 20% of the work you do on the questions will be different. But, like, as always goes with the 80-20 rule, the 20% of the work that you do that is different is the critical work, right? So yeah, I mean, like, 80% of the work is common, but those are the least critical points that we're focusing on. The 80-20 rule, like, probably I mean, like, almost certainly holds true. In order to develop a general mastery, you need to have a very firm sense of which is common to each questions, the 20 or the 80%. At the same time, in order to reach the upper echelon of scorers, you also need to have a very clear sense of the specific challenges that questions present, the other 20%, and you need strategies that best align with these unique challenges. Unfortunately, the vast majority of test takers go into the exam without a very clear sense of what each question requires, and consequently, they go in without strategies that best align with the design of each question. Perhaps without even being conscious of it, they end up solving a required assumption question in pretty much the same way they might a strengthened question. So, avoid the pitfall similarities of required assumption questions and strengthened questions. As these types of questions have in construction so pay careful attention to the question stem. I think. Let's see here. I think there was one more sentence in this paragraph, so that can work out most of the time, but that lack of specification will prevent them from getting beyond a certain level of accuracy when it comes to required assumption versus strengthening questions. All right. The LSAT is designed to reward a specific understanding of tasks, and it punishes a fuzzy one. Evidence of this, as always, comes in the differentiation between right and wrong choices. The most attractive wrong answer for a required assumption is commonly something that would strengthen the argument, but isn't an assumption that is required. Okay, so that's an interesting tidbit. The most attractive wrong answer for a required assumption question is commonly something that would strengthen the argument, but isn't an assumption that is required. Because I think with the goal of the required assumption is to make the argument 100% airtight. It's an assumption that needs to be made about the argument so that it becomes unbreakable. There's no light in between. uh, where strengthening an argument is similar, but it's obviously, like something that would support and bolster uh, an assumption, I guess, or the argument, and that. I guess like we'd have to look at specific examples of that, and we probably covered some yesterday, but yeah, I'm not gonna go back and review that right now, but yeah, that makes sense. In the case of the required assumption needs to be like completely airtight, but answering the question, answering that type of question in a way by choosing a strengthening rather than the required assumption doesn't make the argument airtight. It doesn't prove it, or it doesn't make it unbreakable 100%. So, all right, moving on. The LSAT is designed to. Oh, we started there. So the right answer might be tough to identify, even though it is required, because it doesn't impact or strengthen the conclusion as significantly as we would like. But it's kind of misleading because the like I was just saying, the whole point of the required assumption is to make it unbreakable, not to like provide another bolstering strength to it. Uh, that's what strengthening the argument is. So, anyway, in this second stage, we will carefully break down and discuss the specific tasks that the different question types present. We will do so with an eye towards how they are similar and how they are unique. We will also lay out and practice specific strategies that best align with the different types of questions. And there's a sidebar note. Each type of question presents a unique type of challenge, and the question stems lay out that challenge very specifically. Yes, every word, like we talked about, every word in that question stem matters towards finding the correct answer. All right, stage 3. The final stage will consist of a significant amount of practice that will help solidify all of the skills that we've been working on and help form them into effective problem solving habits. This work will mostly take place during official problems from LSAC's Law Hub online question bank or in their printed books. Imagine an expert surgeon in the midst of surgery. The surgeon does not have to worry that she understands something correctly, and she doesn't have to consciously remind herself of the strategies she needs to use. Her complete focus is on the needs of that specific patient, and she is naturally able to utilize her understanding and skills to the best of her ability. For us, the goal is that by the time you go into your LSAT, you won't have any concerns about what you know about the exam, and you won't have to consciously remind yourself of how to approach questions. You will be able to put yourself complete. You will be able to put your complete focus into understanding and getting correct the specific question in front of you, and you will naturally be able to use your understanding and skills to the best of your abilities. Yes. So it's the third stage is to get good at habitualizing. I just made up a new word. Apparently, habitualizing is not a verb that you do. We'll just stick with what the wording is. To habitualize effective processes. Well, apparently the spell checker just doesn't recognize it altogether, so. All right, and to uh, continue to habitualize this, like we have the use or SUE acronym for understanding, strategy, and experience. And then he has a graphic here with the acronym laid out. Here's a visual representation of how our priorities evolve at different stages of our logical reasoning training. At first, we want to pay extra attention to developing our understanding and strategies. As we get deeper in our process, the emphasis will shift towards gaining more and more real test experience. And that graphic is on page 42. All right. Section 3 of Comprehension Basics. Actually, we're done with lesson 2. So we're at only 24 minutes. I guess I could have extended yesterday's lesson out to 3 hours and would have been done, but like I'm not reading ahead to prepare these, so yeah. So anyway, I think that will continue on. I'll continue on because I'm not only about half the time that I want to spend today anyway. So this is my production. This is my time. I'm using it the way that I want to. If you don't like it, suck my dick. All right. So continuing on. Reading comprehension basics. It is very hard, next to impossible, for us to change the way that we walk. You can try it if you'd like. We can do it for 5 minutes, maybe 10, and soon enough we'll end up walking the same way we always do. The same thing goes for how we drive and how we talk. Our conscious efforts are no match for such ingrained and instinctual habits. All of this also applies to how we read. Reading is one of the most amazing things that human beings can do, and it's something we do by habit because it takes skills that are well beyond our conscious ability. That's why it's very difficult to change or even just impact the way that we read. We can't do it on a purely conscious level. That is, we can't read differently just by telling ourselves to read differently. Yeah, so this is where, again, he's talking about ingrained habits and the way that we've trained and drilled ourselves over the course of our lives, right? So, changing those is going to take quite a significant, amount of habitualizing new skills, right? And it's going to take correct training and drilling every single day to habitualize. But here's the thing, your brain knows how to walk differently in different situations. It is incredible at adapting. When you walk by someone you find attractive, the way that you walk literally changes, whether you know it or not. If a tiger is chasing you, you'll change your walk into a very fast version called running. And you won't need to think about this on a conscious level for it to happen. Although it is very foolish to run from a tiger. That that instantly activates their chase and kill instinct. But you might get mauled anyway if you just like stand still. But yeah, running from a tiger is yeah, that's a foolish course of action. But like, what are you gonna do in that situation? Anyway, um, I was thinking more about ice, right? So walking on slippery surfaces, you need to change your walk to a slower and more deliberate pace, so that you don't slip and fall. And that includes, like taking smaller steps and being sure of your footing from the one step before you take another. So yeah, so that you make it across safely, whatever patch of ice you're on. Your brain also knows how to adapt to different reading situations. It's amazing at it. Your brain reads a newspaper article differently than it does a recipe, or a work email, or a letter from a friend. It knows that sometimes its job is to be critical, and other times its purpose is to be empathetic. Again, we adapt almost perfectly without any conscious effort. The problem is that your brain does not know how to read LSAT passages. It doesn't yet have the information or experience to have correct instincts. What we need to do is supply it with exactly the right information about how to approach LSAT reading passages. We also need to get plenty of experience with specific and useful reinforcements so that we can turn these reading instincts into habits. Take a look at this next passage and try your best to answer the accompanying questions, keeping track of your time, but don't prioritize timing for now. Anyway, so yeah, let's open a new. We're going to call this one. All right, we're going to call this one Reading Comprehension Basics, and then let's see here. Maybe I need to open a new source. Here we go. All right. Okay, so we have a side note here. We read by habit, and we can't change how we read just by wanting to. That will be our first entry here. And we can't change how we read just by wanting to. All right, diving right in. So, sample passage and questions. On this page and the next are an LSAT passage and all questions that accompany that passage when it originally appeared. Time yourself as you need or as you read the passage and solve the questions, but do not at this point worry about sacrificing accuracy for speed. We will discuss the passage and questions in detail in just a bit. Yeah, no, we're not going to sacrifice accuracy for speed. We're going to take this nice and slow because we're going to type this out. So bear with me as we do this, because these are kind of long passages, and then there's several questions that go along with them. So, all right, experts anticipate that global atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide CO2 will have doubled by the end of the 21st century. It is known that CO2 can contribute to global warming by trapping solar energy that is being radiated as heat from the Earth's surface. However, some research has suggested that elevated CO2 levels would enhance the photosynthetic properties or rates rather of plants, resulting in a lush world of agricultural abundance, and that this CO2 fertilization effect might eventually decrease the rates of global warming. The increased vegetation in such an environment could be counted on to draw more CO2 from the atmosphere. The level of CO2 would thus increase at a lower rate than many experts have predicted. That would be well and good if we weren't deforesting at the same time. However, while a number of recent studies confirm that plant growth could be or would be generally enhanced in an atmosphere rich in CO2. They also suggest that increased CO2 would differentially increase the growth rates of different species of plants, which could eventually result in decreased agricultural yields. Certain important crops such as corn, I think they mean maize, and sugarcane that currently have higher photosynthetic efficiencies than other plants may lose that edge in an atmosphere rich in CO2. Patterson and Flint have shown that these important crops may experience yield reductions because of the increased performance of certain weeds. Such differences in growth rates between plant species could also alter ecosystem stability. Studies have shown that within rangeland regions, for example, a weedy grass grows much better with plentiful CO2 than do 3 other grasses. Because this weedy grass predisposes land to burning, its potential increase may lead to greater numbers of and more severe wildfires in future rangeland communities. It is clear that the CO2 fertil- uh, fertilization effect does not guarantee the lush world of agricultural abundance that once seemed likely. But what about the potential for the increased CO2 uptake of CO2 to decrease the rate of global warming? Some studies suggest that the changes accompanying global warming will not improve the ability of terrestrial ecosystems to absorb CO2. Billings stimulation of global warming conditions in wet tundra grasslands showed that the level of CO2 actually increased. Yeah, that's been evident by the thawing of these tundra regions and then increasing the release of trapped methane gases within the soils. Plant growth did increase under these conditions because of the warmer temperatures. Oops. And increased CO2 levels. But as the permafrost melted, more peat accumulated dead plant material. Began to decompose. This process, in turn, liberated more CO2 into the atmosphere. Billings estimated that if summer temperatures rose another 4 degrees Celsius. Dog, 4 degrees Celsius is fucking crazy. The tundra would liberate 50% more CO2 than it does in a warmer world. Increased plant which could absorb more CO2 from the atmosphere. Would not compensate for this rapid increase in decomposition. This observation is particularly important because high latitude habitats such as the tundra are expected to experience the greatest temperature increase. All right, so that's our reading passage. And then we have a series of questions here. So we'll just we'll type them out and get started here. Okay, which of the following best states the main points of the passage? Elevated levels of CO2 would enhance photosynthetic rates, thus increasing plant growth and agricultural yields. No. That's a dream world that somebody made up. Recent studies have yielded contradictory findings about the benefits have findings about the benefits of increased levels of CO2 on agricultural productivity. Yes, that was one of the findings, but I don't think that it was the main point of the passage. The possible beneficial effects of possible beneficial effects of increased levels of CO2 on plant growth and global warming have been overstated. And global warming have been overstated. That answer is okay, but it's not super great. But we'll read the two others. Increased levels of CO2 would enhance the growth of growth rates of certain plants, but would inhibit the growth rates of other plants. Yeah, I don't know. That answer's not really specific enough. But let's read the last one. I'm not feeling confident about any of these answers so far, but increased levels of CO2 would increase plant growth, but the rates of global warming would ultimately increase. Wow. Damn, these test writers really are fucking devious. Okay, so let's look at which of the following best states the main point of the passage. Elevated levels of CO2 would enhance photosynthetic rates, thus increasing plant growth and agricultural yields. That one's out completely. B. Recent studies have yielded contradictory findings about the benefits of increased levels of CO2 on agricultural productivity. Yes. The possible beneficial effects of increased CO levels of CO2 on plant growth and global warming have been overstated. Again, I think that's probably like the best answer because while this one like addresses the agricultural productivity, it only addresses what was the information that was covered in the second paragraph and doesn't really touch on what was covered in the third paragraph for tundra uh, terrestrial ecosystems, where C is broad enough that it does cover the information. And then D again, like only really covers the information that was given in paragraph 2, but doesn't address um, the uh, permafrost melt and peat decomposition. And then E kind of makes a faulty assumption. So I think that the best answer is C. All right, next question. The passage suggests that the hypothesis mentioned in the first paragraph is not entirely accurate because it fails to take into account which one of the following in uh, in predicting the effects of increased vegetation on the rates of global warming. Increased levels of CO2 will increase the photosynthetic rates of many species of plants. Okay, so the passage suggests that the hypothesis mentioned in the first paragraph is not entirely accurate because it fails to take into account which of the following in predicting the effects of increased vegetation on the rate of global warming. Uh, Increased plant growth not compensate for increased or increases in rates of decomposition caused by warmer temperatures. That one seems likely. Low latitude habitats will experience the greatest increase in temperature increases in temperature in an atmosphere high in CO2. That's just plain false according to the passage. Increased levels of CO2 will change patterns of plant growth and thus will alter the distribution of heat. That's just a complete misunderstanding of the passage. Increases in vegetation can be counted on to draw more CO2 from the atmosphere. Yeah, that doesn't necessarily bear out either. So I think the answer here is B. Like this seems to be the most likely answer because it fails to take into account which of the following in predicting the effects of increased vegetation on the rate of global warming is that increased plant growth cannot compensate for the increases in rates of decomposition caused by warmer temperatures. That seems to be the best answer. Which of the following best describes the function of the last paragraph of it presents the research or it presents research that may undermine a hypothesis presented in the first paragraph. Yes, we'll hold on to that one. It presents solutions for a problem discussed in the first paragraph, first and second paragraphs. No. It provides an additional explanation for a phenomenon described in the first paragraph. What could that be referring to? No, actually, it does not. D, it provides, experimental data in support of a theory described in the preceding paragraph. No, it doesn't do that either. A seems to be the best answer so far. It raises the question that may cast doubts on information presented in the preceding paragraph. No, it doesn't do that either. A is presents research that may undermine a hypothesis presented in the first paragraph. The passage suggests that Patterson and Flint would be most likely to agree with which one of the following statements about increased levels of CO2 in the Earth's atmosphere. They will not increase the growth rates of most species of plants. No, they would not agree with that. They will inhibit the growth of most crops, thus causing substantial decreases in agricultural yields. I don't think they would necessarily agree with that either. They are unlikely to increase the growth rates of plants with lower photosynthetic efficiencies. Yeah, that's actually a likely statement. They will increase the growth rates of certain species of plants more than the growth rates of other species of plants. Yeah, but that's kind of, I mean, like, it's too vague. They will not affect the photosynthetic rates of plants that currently have high photosynthetic efficiency. Let's take it back. Let's go back to paragraph 2 and take a look. They also suggest that increased CO2 would differentially increase the growth rate of different species of plants, which would eventually result in decreased agricultural yields. Actually, B seems to be the most likely out of all of those. So we'll go with B. The author would be most likely to agree with which of the following statements about the conclusion drawn on the basis of the research on plant growth mentioned in the first paragraph of the passage. The conclusions are correct. Okay. In suggesting that increased levels of CO2 will increase the photosynthetic rates of certain plants. B, the conclusions are correct in suggesting that increased levels of CO2 will guarantee abundances of certain important crops. Definitely not. The conclusions are correct in suggesting that increased plant growth will reverse the process of global warming It doesn't necessarily draw that conclusion either. The conclusions are incorrect in suggesting that enhanced plant growth could lead to abundances of certain species. Of plants. That seems to be the most likely answer from what we've discussed. The conclusions are incorrect in suggesting that vegetation can draw CO2 from the atmosphere. It doesn't support that either. That's faulty. D. So the author would be most likely to agree with which of the following statements about the conclusion drawn on the basis of the research on plant growth mentioned in the first paragraph of the passage. The conclusions are incorrect in suggesting that enhanced plant growth could lead to abundances of certain species of plants. D. Okay, the passage supports which one of the following statements about heat in wet tundra grasslands. More of it would decompose if temperatures rose 4 degrees Celsius. Yes, that's already the correct answer. A. It could help absorb more CO2 from the atmosphere if temperatures rose 4 degrees Celsius. No, it actually says the exact opposite. It will not decompose unless the temperatures rise 4 degrees Celsius. That's an incorrect statement. The actual statement is peat is already decomposing and accelerating. The trapped CO2 to re-enter the atmosphere, and a rise of 4 degrees Celsius would increase by 50% the rate of CO2, trapped CO2 re-entering the atmosphere. It decomposes more quickly than heat found in regions at lower latitudes. No, it doesn't really talk about that. More of it accumulates in regions at lower latitudes. A is the correct answer. 21. Which of the following, if true, is least consistent with the hypothesis mentioned in lines 22 through 25? So sentences or sentence starting certain important crops in paragraph 2 of the passage. Okay, so certain important crops, such as corn and sugarcane, that currently have higher photosynthetic efficiencies than other plants, may lose that edge in an atmosphere rich in CO2. These crops have high efficiencies, but they'll lose their competitive edge. The roots of certain tree species grow more rapidly when the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere increases, thus permitting the trees to expand into habitats formerly dominated by grasses with higher photosynthetic rates, or photosynthetic efficiencies. So the passage nowhere mentions trees. So we'll toss that one out. When grown, oops. In an atmosphere high in CO2, certain weeds with low photosynthetic efficiencies begin to thrive in cultivated farmlands formerly dominated by agricultural crops. That statement is true according to the passage. When when grown in an atmosphere high in CO2, certain weeds with low photosynthetic efficiencies begin to thrive in cultivated farmlands formerly dominated by agricultural crops. That is a D statement supported by. So actually, B is the one that we would toss out according to the STEM, because which of the following, if true, is least consistent with the hypothesis mentioned? So actually, A could be our potential answer, but we'll look at the other ones. When trees of a certain species with a high photosynthetic efficiency, and grasses of a certain species with a low photosynthetic efficiency were placed in an atmosphere high in CO2, the trees grew more quickly than the grasses. Um, Actually, after reading that out, C has become our new likely answer. Let's look on when D are when two different species of grass with equivalent CO2 or wait, equivalent photosynthetic efficiencies photosynthetic efficiency were placed in an atmosphere high in CO2. One species grew much more rapidly and crowded the slower growing species out of the growing areas. Yeah, I don't know. The number of leguminous plants decreased in an atmosphere rich, thus diminishing soil fertility and limiting the types of plant species that could thrive in certain habitats. Okay, so which of the following, if true, is least consistent with the hypothesis mentioned? So B was the most true. So this one is completely out. That would be our correct answer if it was the most true, but when trees of certain species with a high photosynthetic efficiency and grasses of a certain species with low synthetic efficiency were placed in an atmosphere in high CO2, the trees grew more quickly than the grasses. I think that C is probably the least true, or is least consistent. If true, is the least consistent with the hypothesis. We're gonna go with C. Oh, I wrote the numbers. And the numbers don't matter. According to the passage, Billings, research addresses which one of the following questions. Uh, which kind of habitat will experience the greatest temperature increase in an atmosphere high in CO2? Yes, it does address that. How much will summer temperatures rise if levels of CO2 double by the end of the 21st century? Will enhanced plant growth necessarily decrease the rate of global warming that has been predicted by experts? You would plant growth be differentially enhanced by or if atmospheric concentrations of CO2 were doubled by the end of the 21st century. No, his research doesn't answer that either. Oops. Does peat decompose more rapidly in wet tundra, oops, grasslands than it does in other types of habitats when atmospheric concentrations of CO2 increase. Uh, it, this is the question that his research addresses: is which kind of habitat will experience the greatest temperature increase in an atmosphere high in CO2, which is the high altitude wet tundra grasslands. All right, let's take a brief look ahead. There's a lot more to do in this reading comprehension section, so we'll call it here for tonight since that did take us a while to process the reading passage and the questions. Yeah, it was a pretty productive night though, and again, as always, if you're watching this to learn more about the LSAT and the different types of questions, whether they're reasoning or reading comprehension, logical reasoning or reading comprehension, then I hope you get something out of it. And yeah, again, thank you for watching if you've made it this far. And uh, have a good one, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.